The last encounter. The rain hammered against the shattered windows of the abandoned safe house, a rhythmic drumming that matched Tobias Reacher's heartbeat. His stealth armor, once a pristine marvel of human engineering, was now battle-worn, marred by deep scuffs and plasma burns. He crouched behind an overturned table, his breathing controlled but heavy. His pistol, an advanced kinetic model, was empty. The ammunition counter glowed red, 0. Somewhere in the shadows, she was there. "Come out, Tobias." A sultry voice cut through the darkness, smooth and edged with amusement. "You've made me work for this. I almost appreciate it." Niara Ven. The most feared assassin in the Dominion. The kind of opponent who didn't miss, didn't hesitate, and never left a job unfinished. Tobias had survived their encounters before, but barely. She was faster, smarter, deadlier. And yet, despite the years of conflict, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more between them, something unspoken beneath the bloodshed. He exhaled slowly, pressing his back against the damp wall, trying to mask his position. "For someone who's supposed to be the best, you're taking your sweet time." His voice was calm, taunting. A laugh. Soft, amused. Says the man who's cornered, out of ammo, and very, very desperate. Tobias tightened his grip on his empty weapon, his mind racing through possibilities. There was no way out, no clever maneuver, no hidden exit. Just him, her, and the inevitable end to their deadly game. A creak. A shift in the shadows. His enhanced hearing caught the faintest sound of movement, barely audible over the rain. She was close. Too close. In a blur of motion, he rolled to the side just as a shimmering blade slashed through the air where his throat had been. He hit the ground hard, twisting to bring his pistol up, a useless instinct, given that it was empty. Niara moved with predatory grace, stepping over him as he lay sprawled on the floor. Her silver eyes glowed faintly in the darkness, reflecting the dim neon light seeping through the cracks in the walls. Her dark blue skin shimmered under the rain-soaked fabric of her sleek assassin's attire, the kind of elegance that made her reputation even more terrifying. "You're out of tricks," she said, pressing the edge of her blade against his neck. "And out of time." Tobias met her gaze, his pulse thrumming beneath her blade. He should have been afraid. Should have been thinking of an escape. Instead, he was watching the way her breath hitched just slightly. She was hesitating. "Why?" "You know," he murmured, careful not to move. "If you were going to kill me, you would have done it already." Niara's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind her eyes. Something Tobias had never seen before. Doubt. The blade remained against his throat, but her grip loosened, just enough for him to notice. "Don't flatter yourself, Reacher," she said, but the usual teasing venom in her voice was missing. Silence stretched between them, charged with something Tobias couldn't quite name. For years, they'd hunted each other, fought each other, tried to kill each other. But now, pressed together in the dim light of an abandoned safe house, there was something else between them. A choice. A moment. And then, everything changed. With a sharp intake of breath, Niara dropped the blade. Tobias barely had time to react before she grabbed the front of his armor and pulled him toward her, closing the distance in an instant. And then she kissed him. It was not a soft, hesitant thing. It was a collision, years of tension, battles, and unspoken words all crashing together in a single desperate moment. Tobias felt the heat of her against him, the sharpness of her nails digging into his skin, the undeniable, impossible reality of what was happening. He should have pushed her away. He should have fought back. Instead, he kissed her harder. The storm outside raged on, but inside that broken-down safe house, something more powerful was unfolding. Something neither of them could take back. When they finally pulled apart, breathless and stunned, Niara's fingers lingered against his chest plate, her expression unreadable. "This changes nothing," she whispered. Tobias swallowed, his heart hammering in his ribs. You sure about that? She hesitated. And then, for the first time in years, Niara Ven, deadliest assassin in the Dominion, turned and ran. Tobias lay there for a long time, staring at the rain-drenched ceiling, trying to convince himself that what had just happened wasn't a mistake. But deep down, he knew. Everything had just changed. And he had no idea what came next. The line between war and desire. Tobias sat in the cockpit of his ship, staring blankly at the empty hyperspace tunnel ahead. His hands rested on the flight controls, but his mind was stuck in that rain-drenched safe house, trapped in a moment he couldn't make sense of. Niara had kissed him. She had him at her mercy. He had expected a blade, a gunshot, or some clever Dominion trick. Not that. And then she ran. It had been 3 days since the encounter, and Tobias was still trying to decide whether he was relieved or disappointed that she hadn't tried to kill him again. His ship's comms crackled to life. Reacher, do you copy? Tobias blinked, shaking himself out of his thoughts. Copy, he responded, clearing his throat. He recognized the voice, Commander Drayson, his handler in the Terran Alliance. The Dominion is mobilizing in the outer sectors, Drayson continued. We've got movement along the neutral zone, covert ops, precision strikes. Word is, they're targeting high-value assets. Tobias frowned. That wasn't standard Dominion strategy. Assets like what? You. Tobias's blood ran cold. They want you alive, Drayson added. Which means you've pissed someone off. Or someone wants to have a chat before putting a bullet in your head. Tobias leaned back in his chair, exhaling. Niara. Of course, it was her. Of course, after everything, she was coming for him. He wasn't sure whether he should be thrilled or terrified. 3 hours later, edge of the neutral zone. Tobias wasn't the kind of man who waited around to be hunted. If Niara wanted him, she was going to have to do it on his terms. The abandoned comm relay station floated in the silence of deep space, long forgotten by any official factions. It was the perfect meeting spot. Hidden. Isolated. The proximity alarm blared. Tobias tensed, his hand hovering over his pistol. His sensors picked up a sleek, black Dominion infiltration vessel entering the station's airlock. She was here. Tobias stood near the docking bay, waiting. His fingers twitched slightly over his sidearm, but deep down, he knew he wasn't going to use it. A hiss of depressurization. The airlock door slid open. And then she was standing there. Niara Ven. She was dressed in her usual combat attire, a form-fitting bodysuit reinforced with stealth plating, sleek black with Dominion insignias along her shoulders. But something was different. Her movements were slower, more cautious. Less assassin, more human. Tobias crossed his arms. I take it you didn't come to finish the job. Niara exhaled, stepping forward, her silver eyes sharp yet conflicted. No. Silence. Tobias arched a brow. Well, this is a nice change of pace. Usually, when you track me down, it's to put a knife between my ribs. She smirked. I considered it. Tobias let out a dry chuckle. How touching. More silence. The air between them was thick with unspoken words. Then, finally, Niara spoke. They want you alive because they think you know something. Something about the Dominion's new fleet movements. Tobias frowned. And do I? She tilted her head, studying him. No. But they don't know that. He exhaled sharply. So what's your angle, Niara? You could have let them capture me. You could have turned me in and been done with it. She took another step closer. Too close. There are things happening in the Dominion, she said, her voice lower now, more serious. Things even I don't understand. The war is changing, Tobias. The Dominion isn't just trying to win anymore. They're planning something bigger. Something dangerous. Tobias narrowed his eyes. And you care, why? She hesitated. Then, quietly, she said, because I think we're on the wrong side of this war. For a long moment, Tobias didn't move. Didn't breathe. Niara Venerable the Niara Ven. The Dominion's most ruthless assassin. Their most loyal operative. Questioning the war. It was unthinkable. You're serious? She nodded. Tobias exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. So what now? Niara glanced away, her expression unreadable. Now, we have two choices. We pretend this conversation never happened. Or. Tobias's pulse quickened. Or. Niara looked at him, really looked at him. Or we find out the truth. Together. Silence. Tobias let out a slow breath. He should walk away. This was dangerous. It was reckless. It was completely insane. But then again. So was kissing her. And he wasn't sure he wanted to stop. Fine, he said, his voice steady. Let's find out the truth. Niara gave him a small, knowing smirk. I was hoping you'd say that. The thin veil of trust. The small transport ship hummed with low vibrations as it cut through the void of deep space. Tobias leaned against the cockpit's threshold, watching Niara work the controls with a precision he had seen before, calculated, deliberate, just like when she fought. Except this time, she wasn't fighting him. They were working together. Sort of. How long until we reach your contact? Tobias asked, crossing his arms. Niara didn't look away from the glowing holodisplays. 5 hours. Silence filled the space between them, thick and unyielding. Tobias could still feel the weight of her kiss from days ago, an unspoken truth neither of them had dared to acknowledge. It lingered in the way she stole quick glances at him, in the way his fingers twitched every time she was near. He didn't trust her. Not completely. But he couldn't ignore what she'd said about the Dominion, about the war shifting. If there was even a chance she was telling the truth, he had to know. You've gone quiet, Niara mused, breaking the silence. That's usually when you're planning something reckless. Tobias smirked. You'd know all about reckless, wouldn't you? She turned in her seat, leveling him with a look that sent a slow burn through his chest. Says the man who let an assassin get close enough to kiss him. Tobias felt his pulse quicken. Damn her. She knew exactly what she was doing. His jaw clenched as he pushed off the threshold and stepped forward, close enough that he could see the faint bioluminescent markings along her skin, glowing softly in the dim light. And yet, I'm still standing. Almost like you don't actually want to kill me. Niara's lips curved into a smirk, but there was something else there too, something she wasn't ready to admit. Don't tempt me. Tobias chuckled, shaking his head as he turned back toward the navigation console. This was dangerous. Not just the mission. Not just the war. This. The way they danced on the edge of something neither of them fully understood. And he had a feeling it was only going to get worse. 5 hours later, Outpost 17, edge of the war zone. The space station hung in the darkness like a forgotten relic, half of its systems flickering with dim power. It was a neutral zone, a place where smugglers, spies, and information brokers thrived. Niara guided their ship into the docking bay with practiced ease. Tobias scanned the area through the viewport, his instincts already on high alert. Who are we meeting? He asked. A Dominion defector, Niara replied, unbuckling her harness. Someone who got too close to the truth and decided to run before the Dominion could silence him. Tobias raised a brow. And he trusts you? Niara smirked. No. But he trusts that I'm dangerous enough to get him off-world if necessary. Tobias sighed, already regretting this. Great. So we're meeting a paranoid defector who thinks we might kill him. What could possibly go wrong? Niara rolled her eyes. Just try not to get shot. They moved through the station's dim corridors, Tobias scanning for threats while Niara led the way. The meeting point was an abandoned control room, the air thick with the scent of rust and ozone. A figure stepped out of the shadows. Tobias immediately recognized the signs of a man on the run, unkempt, tense, eyes constantly darting like he expected death at any moment. The defector's gaze locked onto Niara. You actually came. I keep my word, Niara replied smoothly. The man, Joran, laughed dryly. Right. That's why the Dominion has a kill order on you. Tobias stiffened. That was new. He glanced at Niara, but her expression remained impassive. She hadn't told him that. You're out of time, Ven, Joran continued, shifting nervously. The Dominion is already making moves. They've got something big planned, something that's going to change the war. What is it? Tobias asked, stepping forward. Joran exhaled sharply. They're building something. A weapon. A fleet. Something massive. It's being developed in secret, beyond the outer rim. Niara's expression darkened. Where? Joran hesitated, glancing between them. I need a way out first. I give you this, the Dominion will never stop hunting me. Tobias looked at Niara. Can you get him somewhere safe? She nodded, but before she could respond, a deafening explosion rocked the station. Alarms blared. Joran's eyes went wide with fear. They found me. Niara grabbed Tobias's arm. We need to move. Now. The sound of boots echoed in the corridors. Dominion forces were here. Tobias pulled his sidearm, adrenaline surging. Looks like we get to see how well we really work together. Niara smirked, drawing her twin daggers. Try to keep up. And then the fight began. Fire and betrayal. The corridors erupted with gunfire. Tobias ducked behind a rusted control panel as plasma bolts scorched the air around him. The Dominion strike team was fast, efficient, too efficient. They hadn't come to capture Joran. They'd come to kill him. Joran crouched behind a supply crate, breathing heavily. I told you, they don't let defectors walk away. Tobias gritted his teeth, blind firing a few rounds down the corridor. Yeah, well, we're not exactly in the habit of dying either. Niara moved like a phantom, slipping between cover with her twin daggers drawn. The Dominion soldiers barely saw her before she was on them, slashing through their armor with terrifying precision. Tobias took the opportunity to lay down covering fire, dropping 2 operatives before they could react. But more were coming. Joran, move. Niara shouted, shoving the defector toward the maintenance tunnels. Tobias followed, firing behind them as they sprinted through the station's underbelly. The corridors shook with distant explosions, the Dominion likely scrubbing the station to eliminate any trace of their operation. They reached a dead end. An old docking bay with a single escape pod barely intact. Tell me you can fly this, Tobias panted. Joran scoffed. I can crash it. Good enough. Niara shoved Joran toward the pod's controls. Get in. Send us the coordinates once you're safe. Joran hesitated. And what about you two? Tobias smirked, reloading his pistol. We've got unfinished business. Joran didn't argue. The pod's thrusters ignited, and seconds later, it blasted away from the station. That left just Tobias and Niara. And a rapidly approaching death squad. We need to get back to the ship, Niara said, scanning for a route. Fast. Tobias grinned. Hope you weren't expecting a quiet exit. Niara smirked, gripping her daggers tighter. Wouldn't have it any other way. 5 minutes later, the hangar bay. Their ship sat on the far end of the docking bay, Dominion operatives everywhere. Tobias counted at least a dozen guards, all armed to the teeth. Niara nudged him. We could try sneaking past them. Tobias arched a brow. Since when do we sneak? Niara smiled. Good point. Without another word, they launched into battle. Tobias took out 2 guards with precise headshots before sliding behind cover. Niara dashed between the remaining soldiers, her movements a blur of deadly elegance. Plasma rounds flew past them, but they were faster. Smarter. And, for the first time, together. Tobias slammed into a guard, using his weight to knock him to the ground before putting a round between his eyes. He turned just in time to see Niara disarm a soldier with a graceful twist, slicing his throat in one fluid motion. The final few operatives hesitated, realizing their mistake too late. Tobias and Niara struck as one. Seconds later, the hangar was silent. They sprinted toward their ship, sealing the hatch just as alarms blared across the station. Punch it! Niara shouted. Tobias didn't hesitate. The engines roared to life, and their ship lurched into space, narrowly avoiding incoming fire from Dominion cruisers. Tobias twisted the controls, weaving through the chaos of the battlefield as alarms blared. You better have a plan, Reacher. Niara called over the noise. Tobias grinned. I'm making it up as I go. Niara groaned. Fantastic. As the ship rocketed into hyperspace, leaving the Dominion behind, Tobias exhaled and turned to Niara. Still think we're on the wrong side of this war? Niara didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped forward, gripping the front of his armor and pulling him into a kiss. A real kiss. Not one of hesitation. Not one of confusion. One of certainty. Tobias barely had time to react before she pulled away, her silver eyes blazing. We're on our side now. Tobias smirked. Works for me. A dangerous alliance. The hum of the ship's engines filled the cockpit, steady and reassuring. Tobias sat in the pilot's chair, watching the hyperspace stream stretch endlessly ahead of them. He could still feel the heat of Niara's lips against his. This was different. For years, their battles had been predictable, chasing, fighting, surviving. There had been a rhythm to it, a twisted game where they always knew the rules. But now, they were in uncharted space. Niara stood near the navigation console, arms crossed, studying the data scrolling across the screen. Her silver eyes flickered toward him, unreadable. You're staring again, she said, not looking up. Tobias smirked. Can you blame me? 1 minute, you're trying to kill me. The next, you're kissing you, she finished smoothly. His grin widened. Yeah. That. Niara exhaled, her usual sharp confidence wavering for just a moment. It doesn't change anything. Tobias arched a brow. You sure about that? She hesitated. And that told him everything. Before she could respond, the ship's sensors beeped, an incoming transmission. Joran. Tobias leaned forward and opened the channel. The defector's face appeared on screen, pale and anxious. You made it, Tobias said. Joran nodded quickly. Barely. Listen, I've got the coordinates you need, but you're not going to like it. Niara stepped closer, her arms still crossed. Where? Joran hesitated. Then, reluctantly, he said. Nexus Prime. Tobias felt a cold weight settle in his chest. You've gotta be kidding me. Niara's expression darkened. She understood immediately. Nexus Prime was a fortress world, a neutral trading hub on paper but, in reality, a playground for spies, warlords, and mercenaries. The Dominion and the Alliance both had deep roots there, each using the planet as an unofficial battleground for shadow wars. Getting in was hard. Getting out? Almost impossible. Tobias rubbed a hand over his face. You better have something solid, Joran. Because I don't risk my life for rumors. Joran nodded quickly. It's real. I decrypted Dominion logs. There's something huge happening at a secret facility under Nexus Prime. Fleet movements, classified weapons projects, something called Project Revenant. Niara stiffened. I've never heard of it. That's because it's above your clearance level, Joran said. And mine. They're covering their tracks, wiping people out who even get close. If we want to stop this, we need to move now. Tobias glanced at Niara. Her jaw was tight, her mind clearly racing. He knew that look. She was all in. Fine, she said. Send us the coordinates. Joran hesitated. Are you sure? You do realize that. Just send them, Niara interrupted, her voice leaving no room for argument. Joran exhaled, shaking his head. You two are insane. Tobias grinned. Yeah, we get that a lot. The transmission cut, and the ship's NAV system lit up with new coordinates. Tobias leaned back, watching Niara carefully. You don't have to do this, you know. Once we set foot on Nexus Prime, there's no turning back. She turned to him, her silver eyes burning with something fierce. I made my choice the second I kissed you. Tobias exhaled, feeling his pulse quicken. Then he grinned. Well, I hope you like terrible odds, he said, punching in the jump sequence. The stars stretched, and the ship shot toward Nexus Prime, toward the unknown, toward the biggest gamble of their lives. And for the first time in years, Tobias wasn't running from Niara. He was running with her. Nexus Prime, City of Lies. The skyline of Nexus Prime shimmered under the artificial glow of neon lights and looming skyscrapers. From a distance, it looked like a paradise of trade and diplomacy, a shining example of peace between the Terran Alliance and the Dominion. But Tobias and Niara both knew better. Beneath the towering structures and polished facades was a battleground, a place where the war never stopped, where information was the deadliest weapon, and trust was just another lie waiting to be broken. Tobias stood at the viewport of their ship, watching as they descended toward the city's lower districts. His grip tightened around the controls, his instincts already on high alert. This place gives me a headache, he muttered. Niara smirked from the co-pilot's seat. That's because you're used to fighting in open space, not the shadows. Open space is honest. You know who's trying to kill you. She chuckled. And here, everyone is. The ship touched down in a private docking bay, shielded from standard scans. No official records. No paper trail. Just the way they needed it. Tobias turned to Niara. Joran said the intel is buried under a Dominion research site. Any idea how we break in? Niara's expression was unreadable. There's an old contact I need to see first. Someone who might still owe me a favor. Tobias arched a brow. Define old contact. She hesitated. Just a fraction of a second. Then she stood, grabbing a sleek coat to cover her form-fitting combat attire. Come on, Reacher. Try to keep up. The underworld, Sector 7, Nexus Prime. The streets of Sector 7 pulsed with life. Vendors shouted over the crowds, selling everything from cybernetic implants to illegal weapon mods. The scent of burning fuel mixed with the spice-heavy aroma of Dominion street food, creating an atmosphere that was both intoxicating and dangerous. Tobias stayed close to Niara as they weaved through the shifting crowds, his hand hovering near his holster. He wasn't paranoid. Just experienced. After a few minutes, they reached a dimly lit bar tucked between towering buildings. The neon sign flickered, half broken. The Veil. Niara led the way inside, the air thick with smoke and whispered deals. Tobias scanned the room, already picking out weapons, threats, and too many eyes on them. Then he saw who Niara was looking for. A tall Dominion officer sat in the corner, dressed in civilian attire, but Tobias knew military when he saw it. The man's pale blue skin was marked with subtle Dominion tattoos, and his silver eyes gleamed with recognition when he saw Niara. Then, he greeted, leaning back in his chair. "Didn't think I'd ever see you again." Niara took the seat across from him, her expression cool. "You owe me." The officer chuckled. "Do I? Last I checked, you vanished after your last mission. Everyone assumed you were dead." Tobias slid into the seat beside her, his gaze locked on the Dominion man. "Well, she's not. And we need information." The officer studied him for a moment before turning back to Niara. "You trust him?" Niara hesitated. Tobias noticed. Finally, she said, "I trust that we have the same enemies." The officer exhaled. "That's not the same thing, Venerable." Tobias smirked. "No, but it's close enough." The officer glanced around the bar before lowering his voice. "You're looking for Project Revenant. You have no idea how deep this goes." Tobias leaned in. "Then tell us." The officer hesitated, then pulled out a small data chip, sliding it across the table. "This has everything I could get without being erased. Security schematics, key personnel, weaknesses. But if you're thinking of breaking in, you're already dead." Niara took the chip. "We'll take our chances." The officer gave a dry laugh. "You always did." Then, suddenly, gunfire. The front of the bar exploded, sending glass and debris flying. Tobias tackled Niara, shielding her as Dominion enforcers stormed the entrance. Their contact was already moving, flipping the table for cover as energy bolts lit up the room. Niara pulled her blaster, firing back. "Guess we overstayed our welcome." Tobias grinned, drawing his pistol. "Yeah. Let's make it a night to remember." The final betrayal. Blaster fire tore through the bar, shattering bottles and sending neon sparks across the smoke-filled air. Tobias ducked behind the overturned table, his pistol already hot from returning fire. They were outnumbered. A dozen Dominion enforcers poured through the ruined entrance, moving with military precision. This wasn't some back-alley ambush, this was an execution. They had walked into a trap. Niara cursed under her breath, sliding into cover beside Tobias. "They weren't supposed to find us this fast." Tobias smirked. "I'd be offended if they didn't." Niara returned fire, taking down 2 enforcers with precision shots. Their contact, the Dominion officer who had given them the intel, was already moving toward the back exit, clutching his shoulder where a stray shot had grazed him. "You led them here." Tobias called out. The officer gave him a dry look. "You think I want to die in a bar?" "No." A plasma grenade rolled toward them, the escape. They burst through the back of the ruined bar, gunfire chasing them through the alley. Rain hammered against the steel cityscape, the neon glow of Nexus Prime painting everything in eerie reds and blues. A sleek black transport sat idling at the far end of the alley, engine humming. Niara sprinted toward it, Tobias right behind her. More enforcers appeared on the rooftops, taking shots at them. Tobias twisted mid-stride, dropping 2 of them with precise pistol shots. "They're not letting us go easy." Niara leaped into the pilot's seat, already powering up the engines. "They never do." Tobias barely had time to jump inside before the transport lurched into the air, speeding toward the city's skyline. Below them, Dominion patrol ships scrambled to give chase. Tobias strapped into the co-pilot seat, pulling up the navigation display. "We can't outrun them." Niara's hands flew over the controls. "We won't have to." Tobias frowned. "That doesn't sound." The ship suddenly nosedived. He grabbed the seat, his stomach dropping as Niara threaded the transport through a maze of skyscrapers, banking hard enough to make gravity forget which way was down. Dominion fighters chased after them, struggling to match Niara's impossible maneuvers. Tobias grinned. Damn, she was good. Niara locked onto a nearby construction tower, dodging scaffolding at suicidal speeds. The pursuing ships weren't as lucky, two of them clipped the metal framework and spiraled out of control. Tobias let out a low whistle. Remind me not to get into a dogfight with you. Niara smirked. You wouldn't last 5 seconds. A warning light flashed across the console. Missiles locked. Tobias's grin dropped. Niara muttered a Dominion curse. Hold on. She cut the engines mid-air. The sudden stall sent the transport plummeting, the heat-seeking missiles screaming past them, missing completely. Tobias exhaled. You are ridiculous. Niara smirked. You love it. Their ship roared back to life as Niara pulled them up from the freefall. The last of the Dominion ships vanished from the radar, either lost in the chaos or assuming them dead. For now, they were clear. But they both knew that wouldn't last. The truth about Project Revenant. The stolen ship cruised into the upper atmosphere, finally leaving the chaos of Nexus Prime behind. Tobias sat in the co-pilot seat, running through the data chip their contact had died for. This is bad, he muttered. Niara glanced over. How bad? Tobias exhaled. Endgame bad. The data contained detailed plans for Project Revenant, a Dominion operation that wasn't just about new weapons or ships. It was bigger. The Dominion was planning something unprecedented. A fleet of ships unlike anything seen before, designed for absolute planetary annihilation. Niara stiffened. That's not just a war strategy. That's a purge, Tobias finished. They're not fighting to win anymore. They're fighting to end it. Niara's face darkened, her hands gripping the controls tighter. We can't let this happen. Tobias met her gaze. Then we need to do something stupid. Niara smirked. Good. I'm excellent at stupid. The final gamble. They had two choices. Run, disappear, and pretend they never saw the data. Or take the fight to both sides. Tobias knew what he wanted. He could see it in Niara's eyes, she wanted the same. They weren't soldiers anymore. They weren't enemies. They were something else now. And whatever happened next, they would face it together. The war wasn't over yet. Not by a long shot.